in an attempt to win over families and buy your vote, the Prime Minister's announced a major new $1 billion fund for childcare to expand and build childcare centres. But it's also promised to replace the Coalition's activity test and provide free childcare to families, including those earning as much as $530,000 a year if it's re-elected. Joining me now, National Senator Matt Canavan. Matt, I wanted to talk to you specifically about this because I know you've got a good economic and policy brain. When the federal government first got into paying for childcare, when taxpayers got on the hook for childcare, the argument was this will get primarily mums, as it was at that time, back into the workforce. So there's a productivity gain, there's taxes coming in that offset what the taxpayers are paying for the centres, and also there's a retention issue with women in the workforce. But today they announced they're going to drop the activity test, so you could put your kid in childcare, but you might not be working at all, and you'll still get this money from the taxpayer. Now, doesn't dropping the activity test negate the whole purpose here?
Well, I certainly can't argue for this extra $1 billion of spending on that basis, Peter. I mean, this is a scheme to help well-to-do families that's been announced today because the government subsidies aren't 100%. You still have to pay a gap. And so if a family is not working, if both aren't working, if one can afford to stay home, beggars the question then, who are these families that then have the spare money to pay for what is quite expensive childcare, even with government subsidies? Those families that are really struggling won't benefit from this because they won't be able to afford those extra costs. So what is this all about then? The only real rationale we can see today, or an attempt at rationale, apart from just giving people money ahead of an election, Peter, the only rationale is that somehow it's important for early learning outcomes for children. But then why aren't we focusing this on early learning centres? Why aren't we providing extra resources for that? And for very young children, all the evidence shows that the best care that can be provided is that by a mother or father. Now, that's not always possible for families that are struggling and they can't do it full time, but I think most new parents want to spend as much time as they can and can afford to do with their children. This scheme, of course, you only get the government assistance and help if you separate yourself from your new baby, even a newborn baby. And I don't know, I think if we've got a spare $1 billion to help families out, why aren't we also trying to help those families that want to look after their own children? That's clearly not just good for them, but we know it's very good for the development of a child. All the studies show that for very young children.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I had Erica Commissar, the social worker from the estates, that's written about this very much. It's 0 to 3 that are those really primary caring ages that a parent at home, she argues, particularly the mum's critical. So on that vein then, why wouldn't we just say, we'll give the parent the money for the child from 0 to 3. If you're working part-time, if you're studying, if you're in the university, perhaps back in the workforce or not, if you've taken a leave of your job and you've got no money coming in, but you think being at home as a mum or a dad is important, use the money the way you want to use the money as a parent. And for those children aged 3 and 4, if the argument there is about early childhood education, then why aren't we saying to all the schools around the country, all the primary schools, you offer that as a class, as a school, part of the school curriculum. We just start kids at school at 3 and 4. We've got all of these school grounds around the country, put childcare facilities there or early learning facilities there, and we save the taxpayer a lot of money. We save parents a lot of running around, and we have parent-directed choice in the system. Otherwise, all we're doing here is funding big unions and all the childcare centres, because to get the money, you've got to be a unionised childcare centre.
I think it's an excellent point, Peter. We're currently spending $15 billion a year on childcare subsidies, and with today's announcement that apparently will grow to roughly $16 billion a year. The average family is using around $10,000 a year in subsidies for childcare through this system. So you think about if that could be provided to families directly, and it could help them perhaps bear the costs of staying at home and looking after their children. Now, I think we've got to be careful with schemes like that, because if we give money to people, then of course that has bad impacts on incentives and willingness to get out there and do your own thing. Maybe we need a bigger rethink, I think, of this system, because the experience over the past decade is every few years we chuck a few more $1 billion childcare subsidies.
Correct.
And then invariably what
Correct.
happens is the childcare centres increase their cost base because they get a margin, so the incentive is them to increase their cost base. It doesn't end up cheaper for parents. They end up paying just as much, if not more. And then there's another demand. The cycle begins for more government incentives to offset that. I spoke to a parent today in Sydney. They're paying over $400 a day for two children in childcare. Now, they get government subsidies to help offset that, but over $400 a day. I mean, it's just unsustainable. So a broader examination, I think, is needed, especially of the tax settings here. We're one of the few countries in the world that don't allow parents to share income for tax purposes.
Income splitting,
I don't know about
I
other
agree,
families,
so
but
important.
some kind of income splitting. That would then help, like it would cost the budget money, and so you wouldn't give people a direct help. But if one parent decides to work harder or get a promotion and work a bit more, they can share some of that tax with a parent that might want to stay home and look after their kids and reduce their overall tax bill. Most other countries have this. We don't. My wife and I certainly approach things as a team. We work as a team. Why aren't we taxed as a team? Not sure if my kids are on the same team yet, Peter, but my wife and I try to do things together. And so why doesn't the tax system recognise that?
Geez, I hope you get payoff for those nice comments about your wife on air tonight. You should be saying them. I know you've got 5 kids, so I know she'd work hard. Hey, let's go to this report today that you're considering scrapping what amounts to be a carbon tax by stealth. Explain this for us.
Well, look, this is a so-called value of carbon emissions reduction, which has been inserted into our energy planning system. It's an artificial number that government ministers have themselves established to effectively hide the costs of their ridiculously obsessive renewable energy system. And so what they have said at the moment is they reckon they've pulled a number out from their backside, so to speak, and say, look, we think the value of carbon emissions reductions is $70 a tonne. And that will grow over time to 2050 to apparently $400 a tonne. Keep in mind, at $400 a tonne of carbon dioxide will be worth more than a tonne of wheat. And I don't know about you, but I think the food we eat is perhaps a little bit more valuable than an odourless, colourless gas that exists in the atmosphere. But that's what these brainiacs think at the moment. And as I say, that is influencing our decisions around where transmission lines go to support renewable energy. And we're all ending up by paying more. Another fee, so I think it would be great to scrap that and just evaluate energy projects on whether they can actually lower your power bills. Another aspect of this is that we found out for the first time last week exactly what the calculated shadow carbon price is. This is the cost of net zero, effectively. It is the tax you would need to impose to meet net zero emissions by 2050. This is not an artificial number. It's a calculated number from their economic models. And that shows that by 2050, to meet net zero, we need the equivalent of a $262 tonne carbon tax. And the reason they've kept this hidden, we had to extract it after many Senate inquiry hearings. The reason they're keeping that hidden is, imagine if you went to the Australian people and said, to meet net zero, we need a $262 per tonne carbon tax. They'd reject it out of hand, but that's how costly this ridiculous policy is. All of those costs have to be paid by Australian industry, by Australian businesses, and ultimately Australian households too.
All right, I'll leave it there because that's your job next year in the campaign to expose all of this. I know you will.